So when Perry asks you to take a 40-minute talk and deliver it in 5 minutes, I feel like we've got like two options. One is to cut out 90% of the content. The other option is just to speak really fast. So we've got a bit of a mix of all of that, right? So bear with me, guys. I think we've got a lot of stuff to cover. So what I want to start talking about is how we measure H2. In summary, use run. It's what we're most interested in, right? We're interested in our real users. We don't really care too much about synthetic. It's a very narrow scope. H2 behaves in so many different ways that we want to capture it for all of our users. We're collecting billions of beacons a day at Akamai, and essentially when we look at some of the overall data, we're seeing that some sites see good improvement just by turning H2 on and some sites don't. Why don't some of the sites see good improvement? Third-party content seems to be the #1 thing that really slows down the metric, especially if you're loading that third-party content before your metric. So if you're measuring DOM complete and all your third-party content comes in before that, then it's kind of narrowing the positive effect that H2 can have. So be aware of that. A/B testing is also important as well. Don't ever try and test like H2 for 1 week and then H1 for a week after, or vice versa, because your content's going to change. Your third-party content's going to change. Your content's going to change. It's not a fair test. See if you can split test at the same time. Another thing to bear in mind is that browsers behave very differently. So when you have collected all your data, make sure you drill down into looking per browser family and seeing how that behaves. So look at Chrome H2 versus H1, look at Firefox H2 versus H1 as well. And then finally, also, if you have the opportunity, drill down into your network conditions as well, because that will also have a big impact. Here is a customer where we looked at their wired connection, so anyone with anything kind of connected or over Wi-Fi, and actually there was no real benefit here to H1 and H2. You know, it was pretty uncompelling. But then when we did the same thing and we looked at their cellular connections, when latency increased, then you can start to see that H2 was giving them a much bigger performance improvement than H1. Right, rendering. More often than not, I see a lot of sites turn on H2 without doing anything and rendering gets worse. And basically, the way we have to picture this is, if you think about these idiots fighting for TVs in this slide, then our resources become idiots and they start fighting for bandwidth. Okay, so whenever you see a slow rendering H2 website, think of this picture. So what can we do to improve the rendering of our H2 sites? So the first thing is, make sure you have all of your content or your critical content on the same domain. If you do that, then you're not going to have to make multiple connections to those second, third, fourth, fifth objects on your page, and you're going to save yourself a few milliseconds by doing so. If you do have to split out content onto 2 domains, maybe use a CDN or for whatever other reason, then again, make sure, if you can, have those certificates, have those domains on the same certificate and make sure they resolve to the same IP address. That way, you'll see in this second row here that the browser will just have to resolve the DNS and it won't have to go make the connection again. So again, you can save yourself a little bit of time. If you don't do that, then you're kind of back in this world, which is exactly the same as H1, and then you're not going to see any benefit. Progressive JPEGs, essentially, if we think back to the conundrum around more resources downloading at the same time, progressive JPEGs can paint more with less. So that means that as they get less bits, they can start painting a better picture. So again, for rendering purposes, progressive JPEGs can give you a better result. Here, the example of a test page was about 60% better in terms of the progressive JPEGs had loaded and the others were only 60% complete. Lazy loading. A lot of people don't do it already, but again, it's not a new technique, but it's something that is really important with H2. Again, if we think about getting our critical content as much of the bandwidth as it needs to render the first viewport or the critical area of the page that you're interested in, then using your own lazy loading to do that is even more important in H2. You can even start building your own kind of prioritization trees and things like that if you need to. Server push. This is an example of the Bentley website, and we push down some content. You can see it's about a second improvement here in terms of the rendering experience. And all we were doing here is pushing down CSS and the fonts, and it made a massive impact to the page. So again, pushing is good. Just be careful how much stuff you push. Okay, small files. A lot of people talk about H2 is going to be the savior. We don't have to combine our files and things like that anymore. We ran some experiments. This is the CSS one. Essentially, you can see the lines getting higher as the number of files increases. That means that pages were slowing down, okay? So it's not true. You can't just break out and have hundreds of files without expecting a performance hit. You'll also see in this example, mobile Chrome actually started to struggle to serve various numbers of files above 200. So again, just be aware that the browser of choice you're using can actually deal with handling 200, 300 files at the same time. This is the H1 versus the H2 comparison. So as I've already pointed out, you can see that the pages definitely load faster as you get less and less files. But what we can also see is H2 in Chrome is more efficient at dealing with more files, okay? So it's not faster, but it is more efficient. We did the same thing with JavaScript. And again, similar kind of story, really. Smaller number of files is faster. Slightly different performance in the browsers. And actually interesting, mobile Chrome could handle up to 1,000 files, which is what we were loading here. Other thing to think about with, oh no, rendering's not working. Sorry, I'll gloss over that. The other thing to just bear in mind with the video not working is that rendering with JavaScript and images. So what you'll normally see is things rendering first in H1, but then loading last, and H2 will just come in very quickly, start rendering and finish before H1. So just be aware of that as well. So again, if you've got content that's being used for rendering images, JavaScript, then make sure that is loaded first. Same thing then with sprites. Interestingly, exactly the same story, like less files is better. Mobile Safari seems to have an issue with loading over 100 images again. So just be aware with what you're loading and test it as much as you can. Other considerations with using sprites are the management complexity overhead, the caching, and also the number of images that you're actually using in that sprite. Do you need to load that many? Or could you just load like 10, 20 files and things like that? So let's wrap everything up. So most of the time, H2 does improve performance. Don't give up if it doesn't. There's a few quick techniques in there that you could use to try and speed things up. Anti-patterns aren't necessarily anti-patterns, okay? So don't shard your critical content for a start. Keep combining files. Keep using sprites if you use enough images within those sprites. And finally, think about everything that is evolving as well. So servers, browsers, and even the protocol layer, there is still lots of work going on. So if your website isn't much faster today in H2, it might be tomorrow, because you never know. Chrome might release a new version that actually improves the way in which it's dealing with the number of files you're handling things. If you did want more information, there is a link here. I can share it with you. There is a book that we have written. It's in preview edition. It's a free link to go and download. And then that is it. Thank you.